My name is Marla Givens. I was married to Cliff for 47 years. He died on a Sunday morning, with sunlight slipping through the hospital blinds and my hand wrapped around his. The next day, my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back." She didn't flinch, not even a pause. Her words hit harder than the death itself. That house, my house, had been our home since 1982. Every wall carried Cliff's laughter, my roast dinners, Jason's first steps. But suddenly, I was an outsider in my own story. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood there holding a cup of coffee I'd made for her and felt the edges of my old life burn away like paper near a flame. I looked at Jason, my son, who wouldn't meet my eyes. He said something about respecting Camille's wishes and keeping the peace. Cliff's body wasn't even cold, and already they were dividing up his legacy like leftovers. It would have been easier if they'd just robbed me. But no, they smiled. They hugged me at the funeral. They used words like transition and space while quietly moving my things into a storage unit 2 blocks from the church where we said our vows. But Cliff had always planned ahead. And while they measured curtains and calculated resale value, they forgot one thing. He left behind more than a house. He left behind a woman who wasn't ready to disappear. Who knew how to listen, how to wait, and how to strike when the ground beneath her feet stopped shaking. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for what was mine. And if they thought grief would make me soft, they forgot I built that home with my bare hands and a spine they never noticed until it stood against them. The morning after Cliff's funeral, I walked into the kitchen and found Camille rearranging the spice rack like she'd always owned it. She didn't notice me at first. Her voice floated up from her phone, something about backsplash colors and listing agents. I stood there for a full minute before she finally looked up. "Oh, Marla, I thought you'd be at the cemetery." I wasn't. I'd been in the guest room, packing boxes they'd quietly labeled Mom's things. Jason came in next, fresh from a shower, smelling like Cliff's old cologne, probably borrowed without thinking. "Hey, Mom. Camille and I were talking. We think it might be good for you to take a little space. Maybe go to the lake house for a while. Just to rest, you know." The lake house. 3 hours north. Empty for years. No neighbors, no heat. He smiled like it was a gift. Camille poured herself coffee into the mug Cliff bought me last Christmas. "I know this is hard," she said gently, "but things are shifting now. You need time. We all do." I didn't answer. I looked around that kitchen, my kitchen, and noticed how fast things had changed. Camille's jacket on the chair. Jason's laptop open to real estate listings. The grocery list written in someone else's handwriting. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was waking up. They weren't pushing me toward peace. They were pushing me out. And I knew better than to scream. You don't win these wars by crying. You win them by listening, by remembering, by staying quiet long enough for the real story to unfold. I waited until they both left the house, Camille to her yoga class, Jason to the office, and I took the keys to Cliff's truck. It still had his sunglasses on the dashboard and a half-used tin of mints in the console. I didn't cry. I just drove. To the bank. Cliff and I always kept a joint account for household expenses, but a few years ago, he mentioned a trust, said it was for later, and brushed it off like it was nothing. Back then, I assumed it was something boring, investments, taxes, things men like to talk about in leather chairs. But now, I wasn't so sure. At the branch in Crescent Bay, the manager still remembered me. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Givens," he said, offering a practiced tilt of sympathy. I nodded and slid across Cliff's old envelope. Inside, his original will, a copy of the trust, and his signature in deep black ink. He scanned it, frowned, then typed something into his screen. "Ah," he said. "Mr. Givens designated you sole beneficiary of the discretionary trust. It's fully active and unrestricted. Would you like to see the balance?" I nodded. When he turned the monitor toward me, I felt my heart hitch. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. Enough to buy me choices, enough to remind me that Cliff had seen this coming long before I did. I walked out with a folder and a password, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. They wanted me quiet, gone, erased. But Cliff hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me a loaded chessboard, and my first move was now in play. Cliff may have retired 2 years ago, but he never fully stepped away from Given's build and design. Every Monday, he'd review contracts from his armchair, red pen in hand, muttering about inflated lumber costs and careless invoicing. I used to tease him, "Let it go, Cliff," but he never did. That memory is what sent me back to the office. I walked in like I still belonged because technically, I did. My name was still on the board, a silent co-founder title nobody used anymore. But thank you, Morales, Cliff's longtime assistant, stood when he saw me. His face went stiff. "I thought Jason was handling everything now," he said. "I'm not here to make waves," I replied. "Just wanted to look through Cliff's last few statements. For closure." "Thank you," hesitated, then slowly nodded. He kept his own records. I never touched them. In Cliff's office, dust floated through a streak of afternoon light. The room smelled like old paper and cologne. I opened his drawer, the second from the left, the one he told me held truths the IRS could never touch. There it was, a black notebook, tucked under a rolled blueprint. I flipped through it slowly. Handwritten notes, vendor payments, checks signed, unsigned. Then I saw a series of transactions labeled Jason Advance Return, repeated, over months. Tens of thousands. My throat went dry. It wasn't just a financial hiccup. It was a pattern. Cliff hadn't trusted Jason with the books, and now I knew why. I closed the notebook gently, like it might shatter. If Camille had asked me to leave, Jason had helped her build the door. And now I had proof they were hiding more than grief. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. I walked back into the front office with the same slow, deliberate calm Cliff always used when something was on fire, but no one else knew it yet. "Thank you," looked up from his desk. "Find what you needed?" I nodded, carefully sliding the notebook into my bag. "Just numbers. You know Cliff, he kept everything." He hesitated. "I do. And he didn't like people touching what was his." That pause told me enough. "Thank you," I said quietly. "How long has Jason been drawing from the company?" He looked down. "Longer than he told you, I'd guess." That wasn't a confession, but it was close. I left the office without another word. Drove straight to the lake house, yes. The very same cold, abandoned cabin they thought they'd exile me to. I needed privacy. Quiet. A printer. By evening, I had spreadsheets open across the kitchen table, the old fireplace clicking with electric heat. My hands moved like Cliff's once had, calculating, circling, cross-referencing. When I added it all up, Jason had taken $94,000 from the company over 14 months. Not payroll, not reimbursements. Draws, advances, slush. That same week, he and Camille had petitioned to transfer the deed to the main house, my house, into their names. For estate simplification, their lawyer wrote. They were stripping me out, dollar by dollar. But I had names, dates, account codes, originals, and I wasn't going to beg for space in my own life. They wanted me gone? Fine. But first, they'd feel the weight of every silent step I'd taken since the funeral. Sunday morning, the house was full of laughter that didn't include me. Jason and Camille were hosting brunch for their friends, real estate couples. Loud and tan, with perfect teeth and endless chatter about flipping beach properties. I sat at the far end of the table, closest to the kitchen, like a piece of old furniture no one wanted to move but didn't dare throw out yet. Someone poured me orange juice without asking if I wanted any. They talked about staging the master bedroom, replacing the tile, adding light to the upstairs. It took me 3 full minutes to realize they were talking about my bedroom, my curtains, my walls. I smiled politely. One woman looked at me and said, "You must be so proud of your son, raising the value of this place." I didn't answer. I looked at Jason instead. He never looked back. After the guests left, I began washing dishes, letting the hot water sting my hands. Camille leaned against the counter, sipping her mimosa like a queen surveying her kitchen. "You handled yourself beautifully today," she said. "It means a lot that you're being so mature about the transition." I dried my hands slowly. "Camille," I said calmly, "you ever wonder why a woman like me doesn't scream?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Because we save our voice for when it matters." She looked confused, maybe even nervous, but I smiled and walked away. That evening, I sent a quiet email to Cliff's old tax lawyer. Not Jason's lawyer, ours. Subject line: requesting review of recent deed activity and financial withdrawals. Givens Build and Design. No threats, no warnings, just paper and time. If they were going to erase me, they should have made sure I didn't keep records. By Tuesday, I had an email back from Cliff's old lawyer Edgar Barnes, the kind of man who wore suspenders without irony and read estate codes for fun. He'd handled Cliff's business filings for 20 years and always had a soft spot for me, though he never said it out loud. "Marla," the email began, "I'll need access to the trust documents, recent financial activity from the company, and any notices you've received regarding property transfer. If what you're implying is accurate, we have work to do." That night, I scanned everything, every receipt, every email, every line item Cliff scribbled in that notebook. I labeled them meticulously. I didn't want emotion to blur the facts. That was their style, not mine. By Friday, Edgar called. "Jason's been trying to quietly consolidate control," he said. "Filed for a majority share adjustment last month without disclosing it to all board members, which still includes you, by the way." I felt the air shift around me. "And the house?" "The deed was transferred improperly. He used your grief as leverage. That's coercion at minimum. Potential fraud." It was the first time someone used the word fraud. And suddenly, everything became clearer. This wasn't family tension. It was a theft in slow motion, disguised as caregiving and concern. "Edgar," I said, "I don't want to burn them to the ground." "Good," he replied. "But you're allowed to build your fence. And if they get scorched standing too close, that's not your fault." That weekend, I put on Cliff's old coat, stepped outside, and looked at the house I used to call mine. Let them keep hosting brunch. I was building a case. By Monday morning, Camille's tone had changed. She wasn't cold. She was careful. I came down to the kitchen and found her already dressed, heels clicking on tile. Jason stood by the coffee machine, pretending to read his phone. I poured myself tea, took my time, then said without looking up, "I'll need the contact for your real estate attorney." Jason stiffened. "Why?" "I'm contesting the deed transfer," I said calmly, "and filing an injunction on any pending sale." Camille laughed, brittle and forced. "Marla, come on. This isn't how families handle things." I turned to her. "You're right. Families don't lie, or take, or push people out when they're still burying their husbands." The room went quiet. Jason finally spoke. "You don't understand the paperwork." I smiled, slow and steady. "No, Jason, I do. And so does Edgar Barnes." His face drained. Camille stepped forward, voice clipped. "You're upset. We get it. But lawyers? That's escalation. What are people going to think?" I walked to the door, grabbed my coat. Let them think what they want. I'm not the one who's hiding. That day, I didn't go to the grocery store like they assumed. I went to the county clerk's office, filed paperwork, opened a request for financial inquiry, delivered a sealed copy to Edgar. That night, Jason called my cell. I let it ring out. Then Camille sent a text. "Can we talk? Just us? No lawyers?" I stared at it for a long time before replying. "We'll talk when I'm not the only one being honest." They were finally nervous. And I had only just begun. 3 days later, a courier dropped an envelope on my doorstep. Inside, a letter from Camille and Jason's lawyer, all stiff language and veiled threats. They regretted the misunderstanding. They respected my grieving process. But they also strongly advised against further legal action, given the family implications. Family. That word again. I scanned the letter, circled a few contradictions, then dropped it in a folder labeled Attempts at Pressure. An hour later, I called Edgar. They're lawyering up. Let them, he said. That just means they're scared. That same afternoon, I filed for an emergency hearing on the deed transfer and froze the business accounts pending review. Jason's signature authority was temporarily revoked until the court reviewed financial conduct. Legally, I was within my right. By evening, the silence in the house was palpable. At dinner, Jason sat across from me like a man who didn't know whether to argue or apologize. "You're really doing this?" he said. I set down my fork. "Cliff built this house with me. You don't get to decide what part I'm allowed to live in." Camille stared. "You're taking this too far." "No," I said. "I let it go too far already." They didn't yell. They didn't beg. But I saw it in their eyes. They never thought I'd fight back. And they certainly didn't expect me to win battles with paper, not fists. That night, Camille knocked on my bedroom door. "We should talk," she said softly. "Maybe go over everything together." I opened the door just enough to look her in the eye. "I already did," I said. "You just weren't in the room." 2 days before the hearing, I received a small envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note in neat blue ink. "Cliff would be proud of you." I stayed quiet because I was scared. But I saw what Jason did. "If you need me to testify, I will." "Thank you." I read it twice, then sat down on the porch bench, letting the wind fold around me like a soft coat. "Thank you." Cliff's old assistant. Always polite, always neutral, but not blind. I called Edgar. "We have a witness." He paused. "That changes everything." The next morning, I walked past Jason in the hallway. He looked up, waiting for me to flinch, to avoid his gaze. I didn't. Instead, I smiled just a little and kept walking. Camille tried a different tactic. "Maybe we should delay the hearing," she suggested over dinner, pushing food around her plate. "For your peace of mind." "My mind's clearer than it's been in months," I said. That night, I pulled out one of Cliff's old flannel shirts, wore it as I sorted the final papers. I could almost hear him beside me, quiet, steady, always watching the long game. This wasn't just about a house or a business. It was about being counted. About not disappearing just because someone else found your silence convenient. And now, with thank yous note in hand and Edgar preparing the final file, I finally saw the story for what it was. They thought they were erasing a widow. But I was becoming something else entirely. The courthouse smelled like lemon polish and dust. I sat beside Edgar in a room that felt too big and too quiet, watching Jason fidget 2 rows ahead. Camille whispered to him, but his jaw stayed clenched. He wouldn't turn around. Not once. The judge reviewed the documents. Edgar presented the financial logs, the property deed filings, and thank you's sworn statement, simple, powerful, undeniable. Jason tried to explain the transfers. Claimed Cliff had agreed informally. The judge raised one eyebrow. "Do you have that in writing?" Silence. Camille said I was making this harder than it needed to be. That families settle these things privately. I leaned into the microphone. "They asked me to pack my bags 3 days after my husband died. They've had every chance to handle this privately." The judge didn't smile, but she nodded. Ruling, the deed would be returned, the business accounts restored, Jason's access suspended pending further review, and I, Marla Givens, was reinstated as co-owner and trustee. When we walked out, Edgar said nothing. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken. Camille stormed past me, eyes cold. Jason followed, slower. As he passed, I said softly, "You should have remembered whose name built that company." He stopped, but didn't turn around. I didn't expect an apology. I didn't need one. That weekend, I repainted the guest room, moved my things back into the master, and opened a letter Cliff wrote me years ago, sealed in a drawer I hadn't touched since his death. "If they ever forget what you're worth, remind them, but do it with grace." I stood by the window that night, watching the trees shift in the wind. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's widow, but as myself seen, counted, and still here.